The molecular habit that locked the future in place. It began as convenience, a small adjustment repeated often enough that it stopped feeling like a choice. And by the time anyone noticed, the future had already been decided, not through a single dramatic event, but through the quiet accumulation of routine, until routine became the only available path. To understand why this matters today, we need to examine how habits form in chemistry. When a reaction works reliably, repetition follows. Repetition builds confidence. Confidence removes hesitation. Over time, what began as an option hardens into routine, and routine quietly becomes structure. The transition is almost invisible. There is no threshold crossed, no moment where someone declares the habit permanent. It simply stops being reconsidered, and in that absence of reconsideration, it becomes fixed. At first, the molecular habit solved a practical issue. It simplified a process, reduced uncertainty, delivered predictable outcomes in a world that valued consistency. Chemistry rewarded repetition with stability, and stability felt like progress. It was the kind of solution that justified itself with every cycle, each successful iteration reinforcing the decision to repeat it once more. Each repetition reinforced the last. Systems aligned themselves around the reaction. Training adapted. Infrastructure followed. The habit stopped being questioned because it stopped being visible. Chemistry faded into the background of everyday function. It became part of the assumed landscape, as unremarkable and unexamined as gravity. No one questioned it for the same reason. No one questions the air in a room. It was simply there, doing what it had always done. But habits at the molecular level do not stay neutral. Every repeated reaction shapes its surroundings. Inputs adjust, outputs accumulate. Alternatives fall away as systems optimize for what they already do well. The environment around the habit slowly reshapes itself to support it, and in doing so, it makes every departure from the habit more costly and more disruptive than the last. What made this habit powerful was not innovation, but persistence. No single repetition changed the world. Millions of them did. The reaction did not force the future into place. It made every other future slightly harder to reach. Each cycle narrowed the corridor of possibility by a fraction so small it was undetectable, until the corridor had become a single lane with no exits. This is where the story begins, with a molecular habit so ordinary it escaped scrutiny. A pattern repeated until chemistry quietly locked the future in place, long before anyone thought to ask where it was leading. As the habit deepened, chemistry began shaping decisions without being consulted. When a reaction became routine, alternatives felt unnecessary. Why change what already worked? The question itself discouraged exploration. It framed stability as wisdom and experimentation as risk, inverting the relationship between curiosity and caution. Systems optimized themselves around repetition. Equipment was designed for the familiar pathway. Supply chains aligned to support it. Education trained new experts to maintain it. The molecular habit became the easiest option simply because everything else faded away. The infrastructure of convenience grew so complete that choosing differently required not just willingness, but the reconstruction of entire systems built on the assumption that the habit would continue. At first, this alignment felt efficient. Fewer variables, fewer surprises. Chemistry delivered consistency, and consistency reduced effort. Stability was mistaken for security. The comfort of repetition masked the vulnerability it was creating, because a system optimized entirely for one pathway has no capacity to absorb disruption from any other direction. But habits narrow perception. The more often the reaction was repeated, the less visible its limitations became. Side effects blended into background noise. Accumulation went unnoticed because it was gradual. Chemistry kept working, so nothing felt urgent. The slow drift of consequences was never dramatic enough to warrant alarm, and so it was cataloged as acceptable, normal, simply the way things were. This is where early tension emerged. The habit began resisting change. Introducing alternatives required new infrastructure, new training, new uncertainty. The cost of deviation grew with every cycle. What had once been a freely chosen option now carried the weight of institutional momentum, and momentum at that scale does not reverse easily. Scientists noticed that flexibility was disappearing. The system could perform its routine flawlessly, but struggled when conditions shifted. Chemistry had not failed. It had become specialized. Specialization that once looked like mastery now revealed itself as fragility in disguise. The system was excellent at one thing and helpless when asked to do anything else. The molecular habit was no longer just a reaction, it was an assumption. And assumptions, once embedded in chemistry, are remarkably difficult to dislodge. They become the invisible architecture of every decision that follows, shaping what is considered possible and what is dismissed as impractical before it is ever tested. The conflict intensified when the world around the habit began to change. Conditions shifted, resources fluctuated, pressures emerged that the reaction was never designed to handle repeatedly. The environment that had once cooperated with the habit began to diverge from it, and the gap between what the habit required and what reality provided widened steadily. What once felt stable now felt rigid. The molecular habit performed beautifully inside its familiar boundaries, but struggled outside them. Small disruptions produced outsized effects. Chemistry revealed how narrowly the system had been tuned. The precision that made the habit reliable under normal conditions made it brittle under abnormal ones, and the definition of normal was shrinking. This buildup carried emotional weight because the problem was no longer technical. The reaction still worked. The issue was dependence. Entire systems now relied on a single chemical routine, and that reliance limited response options. The habit had become a single point of failure disguised as a foundation of strength. Attempts to adapt exposed the depth of the lock-in. Alternatives existed, but adopting them required undoing years of optimization. Training had to be rewritten, infrastructure replaced. Chemistry had shaped not just processes, but expectations. The lock-in was not merely mechanical. It was cognitive and cultural, embedded in the way people thought about what was achievable and what was not. This was the emotional peak, the realization that the future felt constrained not by physics, but by repetition. A habit chosen for convenience had become a boundary on imagination. The limitation was not in what chemistry could do, but in what the accumulated weight of repetition allowed anyone to consider doing differently. The molecular habit had not broken the system, it had frozen it in place. Chemistry had quietly traded possibility for familiarity, and the cost of change grew with every cycle. The climax arrives with a realization that feels both subtle and unsettling. The future was never taken away. It was narrowed, step by step, by a habit that felt too small to matter. Chemistry did not lock the future in place with force. It did it with comfort. Each repetition made the familiar easier and the unfamiliar harder. Over time, the reaction became the path of least resistance, and every other path slowly disappeared. The lock was not forged in a moment of crisis. It was built one repetition at a time, each one too minor to question and too consistent to interrupt. This is the moment where the illusion breaks. The limitation was never chemical necessity, it was chemical momentum. A system optimized so thoroughly for one way of working that change began to feel unnatural, even dangerous. The habit had rewritten the definition of normal so completely that anything outside it felt like failure rather than exploration. The resolution begins with recognition. Habits can be interrupted once they are seen. Chemistry can be redesigned once repetition is questioned. Flexibility returns not through invention, but through willingness to accept short-term discomfort for long-term freedom. The first step is not a new reaction. It is the decision to look clearly at the old one and ask whether its continuation serves the future or merely preserves the past. This story reveals something essential about progress. The most powerful forces shaping tomorrow are often the ones we stop noticing today. Reactions repeated without reflection do not just solve problems, they decide what problems we are allowed to solve next. The habit does not announce its influence. It exercises it silently through the slow elimination of every alternative it was never asked to compete against. Chemistry will always reward consistency. That is its nature. The responsibility lies in deciding which patterns deserve to be repeated and which ones should be allowed to fade. Because once a molecular habit becomes invisible, it does not just shape the present. It quietly decides the future long before anyone realizes a decision was made. The molecular